Welcome to the Artful Teaching Podcast. I'm your host today, Heather Francis, and I have an awesome co-host here with me. You've heard her before here on the Native American Curriculum Initiative series. It is Brenda Beyal.
Hi, Heather. I am so excited to be helping you out today. I am excited about our two guests that we're going to be visiting with and, get ready for a great conversation.
We have two artists here from the Turtle Island Art Collective to speak with us about their artistry and about the collective.
Hello, Yat. My name is Crystal Begay. I am Navajo and Tewa, and I am the artist behind Creative Native Boutique. I kind of specialize in Plains Indian-style moccasins and regalia.
Hello, my name's Alan Groves. I am an enrolled member of the Northern Ute tribe, and I'm also Hopi. I am a teacher, a high school teacher, and I am an artist. I work in quilt work and beadwork as well.
My first question for you is, how did you come to the Turtle Island Art Collective?
I'll start with that one. So about 5 years ago, me and another artist on our collective, Kyle Reyes, we had this idea to start a community art house where we could just see the need for, in an urban area to have, or a suburban area where we live, to have a place where kids could go, families could go and really participate in art. And one thing I've really found is that art is, in a suburban area, it's really one of the things I think that most kids or most people experience living in the suburban area is that they're kind of caught between two worlds. They're away from their traditional family members, the cultural side, but there's not really a place for them to learn that in a suburban or urban area. And I grew up that way, and Kyle grew up in LA, and he saw that as well. So we really wanted to provide a place where they could come and learn, and we found that art is a non-threatening way. Sometimes you grow up as an Indigenous person in a non-Indigenous area, and you kind of don't know where to turn. It's intimidating. The other people around you look at you like the authority when you may not feel like the authority. But then when you go with your family members or whoever, they look at you like you're not Native enough. So you're kind of caught between these two worlds, and it's hard, and you can feel self-conscious. So we feel like art was a way that we could reach out in a non-threatening way where people could experience culture and they could explore culture and identity. We wrote a proposal. We were going to try and work in conjunction with UVU, but our proposal kind of just sat there for 5 years. And then I was talking to one of our friends and one of our founders, Jordan Allison, and he is a business mind. I was asked, he's finishing school. He runs several businesses on the side. Over the quarantine, I think he said he made like $15,000 just selling weights. He would find weights and buy them and then sell them on eBay because everybody's home working out. He just has that kind of mind. So we sat down together one afternoon, went out to lunch, and I proposed this idea to him. I asked him, do you know how to start an organization from the scratch? He's worked in several jobs in several small businesses, several small organizations, and he's never really had an opportunity to work at one from scratch. So as we talked about it, I said, okay, well, maybe we can use this as an opportunity for you to learn how to run an organization. I do have a couple of businesses I run on the side. So I said, hey, let's work together, and you can run the business part, and I'll work on the artist part, and we can work it together. So that's kind of how it started. We kind of dialogued a mission statement, and as we were sitting there, and then as we sought out artists, we tried to find artists who matched our mission statement, who both had a connection and a similar experience, but also matched our mission statement. And Crystal was one of the first ones that came to mind when we were talking.
That's fantastic. I'm wondering, what is your mission statement?
Our mission statement, we have really two parts of our mission statement. One is to provide a space for Indigenous, specifically Native American artists in the digital realm. Art has really changed. And one thing, I'm a high school teacher, and one thing I found is that kids they consume art in a different way than we did growing up. They don't necessarily go to museums and view art like we did. There's so much available to them through the internet, and so we wanted to provide a space where they could view art in a form that they were ready to consume it in. So that was one. We wanted to provide this footprint in the digital world for Indigenous artists. And then number two, we wanted to try and empower them in this exploration of identity. We wanted to try and give them a way to connect with artists who have the same story as them, who have experienced the same thing as them. So those are really the two big ideas. We do have a third one that is that third part of our mission statement that we're still working on or still figuring out if that's the direction we want to go, which is to provide a way that artists, if they're looking to make money or run a business off of their art, that we could provide a way or means with them to do that. That one's still coming. We dialogue that a little bit after our first year to see if that's something that we want to pursue or how we could pursue it. So that's the third part.
Thank you. And I'm also interested, Crystal, in how you came to the Turtle Island Art Collective.
Well, I have known Al and Kyle for a few years. I mean, many years. We've been good friends. I was invited as an artist. I have made moccasins now for about 14 years. And I've had my own social media, Instagram, Facebook sites where I sell my items and kind of advertise my business, And I was approached by Al and Kyle to join this collective. And what really got me excited was the opportunity to help inspire Indigenous youth here in our area. Like Al said, it is hard growing up in an urban area where you're removed from your cultural heritage. I have children that I'm raising here in Utah that are separated from that heritage. They don't see it every day. They don't learn it in school. They're not learning the language in school like I did. I grew up on the Navajo reservation, and it was so rich. Every day you were taught something, and it was fun. It was exciting. And so to have that opportunity to share with the youth here in our community just seemed like a great opportunity. And I was excited about that.
Now, earlier when we were talking, Crystal, you said you didn't see yourself as an artist before. Can you describe why and how you've come to see yourself as an artist?
I'm kind of an introvert. I'm kind of a shy person by nature, kind of my Navajo culture coming out of me. But I've always seen myself as a mom, first and foremost. I have 5 children. My youngest is 4, my oldest is 14. And I've always seen this business, I even want to use quotations, a business, because I see it as a side hustle. I'm a mom, I'm busy at home, and beading something while my toddler toddles around, it was just something that came to me and has been natural for me. So now to be elevated to this artist status, it feels so foreign to me. But it's exciting because I feel at the same time, I look back over 14 years and I've made more moccasins than I can count. I've had more interactions than I can count, opportunities to share my art that, I'm an artist.
That's wonderful, Crystal. I've seen your moccasins. They're absolutely beautiful. But I've also seen Al's work, and I want to know, Al, I want to know about your journey, how your art has helped you to connect to your culture and in a way helped you with your identity.
So, like I said, I grew up in a primarily suburban area, and there was maybe in my high school when growing up, we had maybe 3 other brown kids in my school. One of them was my older brother, and there were some Native kids who would come and live with families and come and go. And so I didn't really have, while my parents did an amazing job of trying to expose me or introduce me to Native families or other activities whatever activities we had in our area. They did a great job of that. They did a great job in our home of helping me understand the importance of what being a Native American means. I didn't have that. And if you know about Indigenous communities around the globe, it really is, there is this idea of communal success that when your success comes when you figure out where you can add to your community. It's opposite of what we find in Europe, where success comes when you stick out from your community. And you think about the aristocracies, they would leave all the people in the city and go out to the country and establish these big estates. Well, Indigenous communities were opposite, where you found success when you could find something that your community needed and you could do that well. And I missed out on that growing up. I didn't realize it, but that was something that was missing from my life, is how could I figure that out? But artistically, I was drawn to things that were like that. Like graffiti art was my first love. I grew up drawing. My dad would draw, and I just kind of took to that in school. But my first love was graffiti art, because if you look at graffiti art in the late 80s and 90s, early 90s, it had meaning. They were saying something. And that was my first love and my exploration of this idea of what art. My grandfather is a Hopi silversmith, so we always had Hopi art in our home. And then as I got older and got married and started having kids, me and my wife discussed, what are we going to teach them? How do we teach them how to be Native American? Like, how does that work? And as I started figuring it out for myself, that art is the way that came. And I started beading. We started making regalia for my kids as they got old enough to dance. And it was just an exploration of what do I want for them. And that's how it came through art. And so for me now, that's the primary means. I'm a little bit different than Crystal. I don't sell a bunch of stuff. I've sold a little bit of stuff, and I get requests all the time. But that connection with people, and I know Crystal does a great job of this, actually, like connecting with them on what she's creating for them. But that connection with people is really what drives me to create, whether that's for my own family or I've had some really good experiences over the quarantine where people have reached out to me and told me their story, and then I was able to make pieces for them. So that's what really drives me, and that's what I think my draw to Native American art is that there's a story behind the colors you use and the patterns that you use and the images that you use, that there is a definite story that's there. It's more than just aesthetics. So I just made a piece. I just finished a piece yesterday. It's a quill work medallion, porcupine quill medallion, and it has a $1 gold Sacagawea coin with the red hand painted. My wife is a nail technician, and she painted this red hand over the mouth of this image, and I made it. And I made it for my daughter because of this idea of offerings. When I first started making stuff 2 years ago, somebody traded me a box of porcupine quills, already dyed, a big giant box, had thousands and thousands of quills in it, but they're all mixed up. There's 13 colors, and they're all mixed up. And so I'm sitting there at my table sorting quills, and my daughter just sits down next to me. She's in high school. She's just sat down next to me, and she's like, "Do you need some help?" And I'm like, "Sure." And then so she sorted the whole box. It probably took her the whole summer. We would just sit down, and I would start making stuff, and she would start sorting stuff. And then when we got done, we had all these bags full of quills. And then we got done. I said, "Okay, what do you want?" And she said, "I want one of these medallions you've been making." Well, that was 2 years ago. And so I finished it yesterday, and I gave it to her today, and she was so excited. But the idea is this idea of offerings, that when somebody does something for you that you can't do for yourself, then you provide them with an offering. And it can be big and it can be small. And it took me 2 years to get. I probably made 5 or 6 of them along the way, and they always pass through our house and go out, and she's just patiently waiting. And so I made this for her, and that's the story behind it, and that's why I love Native American art.
I feel like what you were talking about is reciprocity. That idea that it is more than just, it's gifting, but it's gifting with thankfulness and gratitude. And so the idea of her sorting your quills, and then you in reciprocity through your gift giving and your thankfulness and gratitude, you offer her this medallion. I think that's beautiful.
I love the idea of reciprocity. I've been learning about it a lot working on the Native American Curriculum Initiative. I knew the word, but I didn't know it in Indigenous ways. But Brenda gave me the book Braiding Sweetgrass, and that's why I really got to hear stories about it. But I also hear in your third mission statement that you're considering the idea of helping Native artists sort of as business owners. And where does reciprocity fit into compensation for Native artists? And how do you feel about that? You said, Alan, that you don't sell things very much. Crystal does. She had her side hustle, her business. And I know as a non-Native that I feel like I assume I could support Turtle Island Collective by being someone who I use, my money to show how much I value the pieces you make and, pay the right price to show the value. And But then I also hear about this gift giving. Like, would it be offensive for me to pay for something that a Native artist wanted to gift?
I'll answer first, and then I'll let Crystal answer. I would say that is an interesting idea. Now, I would say first and foremost, it's probably up to the artist, right? Their approach for sure. And there's no right and wrong when it comes to that. Everybody has their approach. Some people are doing this for a living. I have the blessing of not having to make art for a living. And so I can be very selective in what pieces go out into the world and what pieces stay in my community. I have the privilege of doing that, the blessing of being able to do that. So really, I would say first and foremost, it's up to the artist. But I definitely would say there is a very different attitude, I guess I would say, for lack of a better word, when it comes to how things are sold. Because the hard thing is seeing Native American art mass produced for commercial sake. Because there is a lot. I mean, just for me, like I said, it took us that whole summer to sort those quills. Like there's a lot of effort and love and pain and that goes into creation of these pieces, and there's lessons that you learn from the process. And so that being said, there's a certain amount of care or selectiveness that I think that does go in sharing these things. And so I would say, but I guess the general rule is if an artist is going to sell it to you, then yeah, absolutely, it's open for you. And like I said, I have sold some stuff. But usually for me, it comes with after I get to know somebody, at least to some extent. And that's been one of the blessings of actually doing it through digital means, is that people can message me from around the world, people from around the country, and share their story with me. And I've intended to sell pieces and end up gifting them anyways because of somebody's story. But I'll let Crystal share from her perspective.
I think my perspective is more from a business perspective, where I originally started this as a side hustle, to make a little money here and there to help with my family. But I love that about Native culture, that tribes all across the country are a group of giving. They have a giving mentality. I love that. I love hearing someone's story and being so connected to them that you want to gift them, a piece of art. I love that. And I'm not opposed to that. I grew up on the Navajo reservation seeing hustlers, seeing, I don't know a better word, on the reservation, seeing, you're sitting in the Pizza Hut and people come in with their arms full of turquoise jewelry that they've handmade. They don't have a job, that they go to 8 to 5 every day, but they're home carving turquoise, making silver jewelry, weaving rugs, making baskets, and coming to a place where there's people, and selling them. And so that's kind of how I saw myself, was I want to do that. And I'm home, I'm raising my 5 children, I have babies, I can't afford to put them in childcare and then go get a real job in an office or a school or something. And so my opportunity is going to be to bead things here at home and to make things here at home and then find ways to sell them. And social media is a great way. It opens up doors, opens the whole world and gives you that opportunity. So I love the idea of gifting, but I also love the idea of opening those opportunities to so many more people.
Just one other idea on that note. I really have, in the last little while, I've really become super open to this idea of trading. It's been really fun for me to, other artists, we trade pieces, but also I had a friend who lives in Canada and he contacted me about some pieces and he's like, okay, how much should I pay you? And I said, you know what, let's find something to trade. You do effort on your part to figure out what you feel like you want to give me, and I will give you this in return. And for me, it became so much more meaningful. He ended up trading me some elk ivories. So he went out and went hunting and shot an elk, and he saved the ivories for me, and I used them in my own pieces. And for me, it's been really rewarding to find things like that I may not be able to go out and purchase myself. It's been really fun to trade some stuff like that. So that's an element that I think maybe our ancestors have experienced in the past that I haven't really experienced until recently. So I like that too.
I want to know about other artists in Turtle Island Collective. Who is part of the collective now? Who are the artists? What are they doing? And how do you pick who is a part of your collective?
Well, so right now we have, I think, 6 different artists. Crystal and myself. Patrick Willie is a dancer, and he is an influencer, I guess you would call him. He has his own YouTube channel that has over 100,000 subscribers. His sister Shelly she's a dancer as well, and she also beads and makes regalia. So she has been involved with us. We have another artist who is in video arts. I don't know if that's how you would describe him. He makes videos, and his name's Adam Conti. His tribe is from the Northeast. And am I forgetting anybody? Dusty Jansen is one. He is very busy. He's more of one. He grew up with a traditional background. He's Navajo. And so he provides more of a grounding for us, especially for those of us who maybe didn't grow up that way. So he comes, he does everything. He sings and he dances. He makes regalia. He knows stories. He's just pretty well-rounded. He's the director of Indian Affairs for the state of Utah. I mean, he just knows everything. So he's been working with us as well. And Kyle Reyes, yes. Kyle's the other one. And Kyle is actually Hawaiian Filipino. He does visual arts. He draws, and he has an amazing shoe collection where he paints on shoes. So those are our main ones. We did have another artist at the beginning. Her name is Ali Saifaloy. She paints watercolors and an illustrator. She has a bunch of big business projects. Her career is kind of taken off, so she kind of took a step back as of late, but she started with us as well. As to the question of what do we look for in new artists, which we are efforting new artists, 2 things. Number one, and probably first and foremost, is we look for people who are trying to match our vision. That's really the most important thing for us when we think about success for Turtle Island. That's why we established our mission statement, is for us to define what success is for us. So first and foremost, they will have to want to have that same desire. And then we're trying to branch out. We're trying to represent all nations if we can. We're trying to add different mediums as well. One thing I think we're trying to express is that our future generations, the way they participate in their culture might be different than us. While we are trying to connect them with their past through art primarily, their story of what it means to be Indigenous is going to be different. My children's story of how they express this side of them, what they do to propagate it, how they take pride in it, is going to be different than my story. And so finding different media that people work in is important for us as well. So those are probably the 2 biggest things.
Fantastic, Al. I know that you and I have had some discussions about inspired by Native artists versus to inspire Native artists. And I would really like to know, or I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about that and help us understand the difference between being inspired by Native art and inspiring Native artists.
I think initially, years ago, it was kind of a widely accepted idea to be inspired by Native art. And I think even myself, I would post maybe beaded earrings that maybe weren't Navajo, like a typical Navajo design. And so I would say they're Native inspired earrings. But times have kind of shifted. And I think it's important for Native artists to have a voice, to have a place in the art world, and to realize that they have their own contributions to make. And instead of saying that I'm inspired by Native work, no, actually, I'm an inspired Native. My little business I call Creative Native Boutique, because I've always been so impressed with my own Navajo heritage, how I know so many people who are so creative growing up, people who could do silversmith work, rugs, baskets, drawing. I grew up with so many kids who could just draw like nobody's business. And I think that overall, across the board, Native American people are just so creative. They're so inspired. And so I love that instead of being inspired by other Natives, which we are inspired ourselves. And so I like that we own that And I love that. I love that gives us that opportunity to have that place, that permanent spot in the art world that we are inspired. We're not getting it from someone else, but we are inspired.
I think that's a great question. And I would say where I see the biggest difference now than maybe in the past is if you look at our history of Native Americans in this country, in this continent, I guess, there was a time when people tried to take being Native American away, right? The whole, kill the Indian, save the man idea. And so I think those of our ancestors who made it out of the boarding schools, who made it out of those ideas, once they saw anything Native American, anything that was shed Native Americans in a positive light, whether it was somebody in a movie or whether it was patterns that they had used to been seeing at home, it was a positive. It was better than they had gotten in their life to that point. And I think for a long time, through the whole 1900s, that probably was the attitude. I think of my grandparents and even my parents, they were excited when they saw those things. They saw them represented in any light that was even remotely positive. Although I think the further we get away from the more generations we get away from that, the more we're realizing that I think it needs to be more than just being represented in any way, that being represented in the way that is meaningful to us, or the way of our choosing, is more important. And that's something I've realized really over the last, 5 or 10 years, I guess, that for me, it's not enough to be a mascot of a team, right? Even that's not enough for me. That creating my own narrative as to what my experience in understanding what it means to be Native American to me, that's what I'm trying to share through my art. When I first started beading, the things that naturally came out were all these Hopi images that came from my home. I saw in my home growing up. So I started beading those, and not very many Hopis bead Hopi images, very often. They work in silver, they weave, they work in pottery, but you don't see a lot of beaded Hopi images. And so that was unique, and I think that sparked some interest in people. And they're very literal designs, right? Hopi images are literal images of clouds or of animals or of things. And so it made me proficient in beadwork. I got a lot of requests to bead other designs for people. And initially when I first started beading, I did. It was just a way for me to get art, to create art, and then also for me to, get stuff out there. But I got to the point where now I just create my own art. I create what comes out of me. And if people like it, then great, right? That's the story I'm telling, is my story now. I have sometimes people ask me, I've had several times people, can you bead me something with the Navajo wedding basket design? And for me, I that's not just something I do, right? I really don't have a connection to that visual piece. I understand, I've heard stories and I've gone to weddings and heard the stories behind it and heard it explained. But for me personally, I don't have a personal connection to that. So now I just say no. But I can bead you something, that I feel like embodies those same ideals from my own perspective. And for me, that's been this idea of inspired natives, native inspired versus inspired natives. I try not to do things inspired by other areas, even within Native American communities. I try not to do that because, one, there's probably somebody who has a direct connection to that maybe that their perspective is probably a little bit deeper. But two, I have feelings and stuff that comes out of my art. Now, that being said, I've had friends who are like, this is my family design. Can you do this for me? And I absolutely will, right? If their connection is so strong with that design or pattern or whatever, and my relationship is one that they're coming to me, I for sure will do that for them.
As I'm listening to you, Al, I keep thinking, inspired by Native artists has within it this underlying feeling or need, or this taking. There's this taking that it's couched in, because you are taking something from someone. You are being it's inspired by Native art or inspired by Native artists, and then inspire Native art or inspire Native artists is a little bit about giving giving inspiration, giving a foundation so that this Native art or this Native person can be inspired to do whatever they need to do, and using art as a vehicle. And then inspired Native art or inspired Native artists are people who have maybe, I don't want to say reached another level, but maybe they are now find that they are confident and they are willing to set aside the taking and just be who they are.
I think that's such a great way to put it. It really is. This idea, if you think about, like, we go back to the idea of communal success, right? That success comes when you find your way to give to your community. That's really the idea. I think now we get caught up in this idea of rights, right? That rights are given to you. You have inherent rights. And I think in Native communities, they didn't really necessarily look at rights. They looked at responsibilities, that you were given responsibilities in your community. And with those responsibility gave you the right or the opportunity or to perform in a certain way, right? Doing whatever fit your job or your way to contribute, whether that was hunting, being providing food for your community, or taking care of children, or providing spiritual guidance. We've kind of flipped that in our world, and we're taking rights without thinking about responsibilities. And I think that fits what you're saying, right? That this idea of Native inspired is really taking these ideas that somebody else has cultivated and using them without going through that process, right? And so this idea of finding what your vision of what life is like and giving it to somebody else in a specific piece, or giving it to your community as a whole, is really important, right? That's you're also giving them those things. And if you're not going through those things, you don't understand those things, then you're probably not giving them, right? If you're buying a t-shirt from Walmart that has a Native inspired print, you're probably not getting all of those lessons, right? You're just taking the art without taking the lessons that go with it. One of the things that we did have the opportunity to do this summer was have a youth art workshop. As our collective, we gathered high school students or secondary students, and we taught them art. But not only did we teach them art, we tried to teach them some of the lessons that we have learned as Native artists that go along with the art. We didn't just give them beads and string and, those paints and markers. We gave them ideas that went with that and tried to help them really be introspective in the way that they approached what they were making. And I think that's kind of this big idea that we're talking about.
I am in reflection mode. I am almost a little speechless hearing about this paradigm of what did you call it?
Communal success.
Communal success. So now I'm thinking, as an inspired artist, you've inspired me. Really, I feel kind of speechless. But then I also think about Patrick Willey, and when you say the word influencer, when I've had Native artists come into my classroom and present for my students, and they come with the stories and the background and the context and a knowledge of the land that they live on and a knowledge of the artifacts that they've brought to share that it's regalia, it's not a costume, to say it's not a hula hoop, it's an actual hoop that I dance with, that it wields influence on my students, it wields influence on me, and it makes me feel connected. Even though I'm non-Native, I feel inspired and I feel influenced by it. Do you have any hopes or dreams about how non-Natives can support the Turtle Island Art Collective?
I would hope that they would see our art as something that's contribution, that it's not just a piece of jewelry, but that there's significance behind it. That maybe they go further and ask, what's significant about these designs? What's significant about these colors? What tribe does this design come from? It's so hard to see people purchase turquoise jewelry, for instance, like plastic jewelry at Walmart or a mainstream store. Not only because it's sad to see that, but because those pieces are made by someone, handmade, they had a thought process to put that design together. There's stories behind that. There's experience behind that. And for someone to just go purchase it without those stories, without that significance, it makes me sad. And so I would hope that they would find ways to support Native artists by seeing the value in the things that we're creating, and want that opportunity to seek more and find the purpose or the meaning behind it.
Yeah, I like that too. I would say maybe one of the biggest benefits, or I think one of the biggest things that we could create from Turtle Island Art Collective is an opportunity to engage in a positive way with Native communities, especially for non-Natives who haven't had that opportunity before. I think that's what I see is that we give them, hopefully we can give people an opportunity to tell a story about their experience with somebody who's involved in the Native community. That's where I think change will happen, right? Like, we can tell people stuff, you should behave like this or you shouldn't do that. We can tell them that, and it may stick or it may not stick. But when they have a personal connection to that person or that community, that's when change starts to happen, right? Regardless of their own experiences or their own feelings or their own political opinions or whatever, change happens when they have an experience. I was talking to it's been like that for the last 2 years, right? I was talking to my own daughter about protests and about social change and about all these things. And, she has her limited perspective. She sees stuff on social media and on TV, and she's very insightful. But this recent, we had a conversation about, well, what happens next? Because I just from my own personal opinion, yes, I felt like protests were needed and you had to get out there and make some noise so change can happen. But change doesn't happen from the protests. Change happens with what comes next, right? And so that similar idea, right, that as people interact with, whether it's our art collective or they're driving through the res and somebody's on the side of the road selling their own art that they have made, that they can stop and have a conversation and make a connection with somebody. And then in the future, they have a story to tell. I have a high school friend who grew up with me, and he reached out maybe through Instagram. He reached out about, 5 or 6 months ago. And he went through his life. He was in business. And then 2 years ago, he said his company went under. And so he had an English degree out of college. And so he went back to school, back to teaching. And he's an English teacher. He teaches freshman English in Southern California. And we were talking about his classroom, and he said, he's like, I don't know how to teach these kids about perspectives that are not their own. He's like, that's the thing I'm struggling with so much, is how do I teach these kids to view other perspectives as beneficial to their life? People who are different parts of the world, people who think differently than them. So he said, during the online teaching, he didn't really decorate his classroom because he was just doing Zoom lessons. And so he said, I want to decorate my classroom with a variety of different perspectives. And he reached out to me, what would you include as a Native American perspective? And we had this long conversation about, he's like, I could choose whatever I wanted, but I don't know if that would be a valid perspective. So I said, you know what, let me do you a favor. And I ended up making him a simulated eagle feather. So they have these eagle feathers. They're really turkey feathers, but they're painted to look like eagle feathers. And I beaded it for him. And I'm sending it to him with a little explanation of, what feathers mean that are different than maybe you would see in the media. And I sent it to him and I said, hey, you and I have a connection, and I appreciate you reaching out and trying to include Native American narrative in your teaching. Let me give this to you, this piece of art. Let me give it to you and it can be, you can put it in your classroom, and it can be a conversation starter. You can tell this story when you talk to your kids, and you can have them, however you want to do it as in your classroom. That's what I see when I see people supporting Native, our collective for sure, but also any other Native American who's selling art. I think we had a conversation before, Brenda, but we talked about moving past arts and crafts. We need to try and taking the crafts out of Native American art, because it's not necessarily a craft you would make at a camp. Even though we've tried to do that, people have tried to do that in the past. It's not a camp craft per se, right? It really is art. And moving towards, I've had some really good interactions with some people who, are prominent in the world when it comes to worldly popularity, whether it's movies or music or stuff like that. And I have been inspired by their willingness to say, I'm not necessarily seeking diamonds for my red carpet. I'm seeking some quilt work, right? Things like, because it means that much to them. The value of it is that much to them, and pushing that narrative forward, I think, is really important.
Thank you, Alan, Crystal. I really, you've got me thinking about so many things, but one of the things that keeps coming to mind is that ideas and attitudes and opinions aren't changed unless you have conversations, unless you develop relationships. And I feel like maybe that kind of underlies what you're doing at Turtle Island Collective, that you are about creating connections and building relationships. And I also feel like, in answer to your question, Heather, I just keep thinking about the idea of opening yourself up to other art and the idea of storytelling, because storytelling is I think is an Indigenous construct. And when we give ourselves time and we have the patience to listen to the stories, the connections are made. And when we hear those stories, we see similarities within our own cultures. And when we honor and we know who we are as a person, I feel like we are more willing to appreciate and acknowledge other people's cultures. And so I see that in you, Heather, just the fact that you feel comfortable in your skin. And when you do, you don't feel threatened by other people's possible pride or possible confidence in their identity. It's only when you don't feel comfortable in your own culture that a lot of times you aren't able to accept others. The term pan-Indian, where many people feel like as Native people, that we are slowly becoming just one Native, one culture. Do you feel like your art combats that idea of pan-Indian?
I've had conversations about this, and I am one. I don't speak for all Native communities. This is my own voice. And it might not be...
You're a Native woman. We all speak for everyone. No,
it might not be super popular, but I feel like the Pan-Indian movement isn't necessarily a bad thing, because our Native people are resilient. They have been through so many things, throughout all of time. And I grew up in a time when I was a kid where tribes stuck to their specific things. You didn't see a Navajo person wearing eagle feathers or wearing buckskin, maybe on our moccasins, but we stuck to our traditional regalia. We did our song and dance. We did our squaw dances. We stuck to those traditional things. But as I got older, as I went to college, there was a shift throughout the whole Native community where all tribes were invited to powwows to partake, to participate. And I feel like we are kind of mixing and mingling. You'll go up to the Crow Reservation and see Crow Native people wearing their beautiful beadwork and their eagle feathers, but they're also wearing a turquoise bracelet or a turquoise squash blossom that you might not have seen years ago. But it's neat to see the sharing, that's going on. And the sharing actually has happened forever, like the Navajos, we got our weavings, our sash belts and stuff from Pueblos. We shared that culture was shared, our regalia. And so I feel like it's a way for us to stay relevant, to survive, is we're going to have to share with each other and take and give and contribute to each other. I've even seen at powwows, now you'll see people using modern things in their regalia, like maybe a CD on their armband, and it's beautiful because it sparkles and shines. Did our grandparents use a CD on their arm, when they were dancing traditional or a fancy dance or something? No. But it's exciting for me to see that shift, to see that we are hanging on sometimes by our fingernails to keep that culture alive. And if it means we're incorporating new things to keep that alive, I'm all for it. It's exciting to me.
I would say this. I have a very similar opinion. So the Utes are one of the only tribes in the West that do Sundance, right? That typically that was a Plains Indians, Plains tribes ceremony. Somewhere, I think it was in the 1930s or 40s, there was a group of Utes who lived on the eastern side of their area, Colorado-ish area, and when the government came, they sent them to North Dakota, I think it was, they learned the Sundance there, and they gave the bear dance. So, and then in the 1960s, they came back home. They came back to this side, and they brought the Sundance with them. So there's tribes there in the Northern Plains who do the bear dance, and there's our tribe out here does the Sundance. And that idea of this is how we survive, or this is, this is what we do to keep it going. I think that's amazing. I would agree. Powwow is a great example of that, right? You have people of every tribe doing powwow, participating in powwow. And I would say on top of that, so much has been taken from our communities that it is important to have something, right? If we only had traditional dances in your area, so many people would be left out, right? Like we kind of like what we said, like kids growing up now in cities who are removed from their cultural influence in their home communities, they might not have anything if they didn't have powwow. They might not have anything if they didn't have something that was given to them from another tribe. This idea of blood quantum, or what community you belong to, it's not a Native American idea. This idea of communal success, when you figured out what you could give to the community, you became part of the community, regardless of what you looked like, regardless of who your parents were. When you found a way to contribute to the community, you became part of the community, and you had equal rights. I had an opportunity. One of my friends, she's Lakota, and her mother had an adoption ceremony for her best friend last year. And her friend is Laguna Pueblo. I think she's from Southern California. And they're such good friends and such good influence. She did a Lakota adoption ceremony and it had nothing to do with where you came from or who you were. It had to do with what you provided to that relationship. And she was her sister after that point in the standing of the community, in the standing of her life. She was her sister. And I think that, like Crystal said, we've always been like that. I think our communities have always been like that. And while there is, I appreciate you saying, being a Hopi, that the sashes came from the Pueblos. I appreciate you saying that. While there is some competition or, between tribes, I think in the big grand scheme of things, working together is part of the solution, right? And so I appreciate that question.
This has been a fabulous hour-long conversation. Thank you so much for being here and meeting with us and recording this podcast. We really appreciate your perspective and to have you in our conversations. I'll just open it up if there's anything else you want to say before we finish.
I just want to say thanks. Yeah, it's nice to have conversations about this and having people help us, get ideas out there, and that's important. I did want to plug our social media, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
You can find our collective on Instagram, Turtle Island Art Collective, and then my own Instagram is pretty much all art. There's like 5 pictures of me eating pizza at the beginning, and then it's turned into all art. And so it's at @Al_Groves, and I'll let Crystal plug hers.
There's no pictures of me eating pizza, thankfully. But I just want to say thank you. This was a great opportunity to share our opinions, our thoughts, our voices on these different questions. I would hope that the viewers maybe would be intrigued by this, would go away wanting to know a little more, maybe about Navajos, maybe about Hopis, maybe about beadwork. Whenever we post things on our page, we usually put a hashtag like beadwork. Moccasins or baby moccasins or something. I invite people to click on those and see the contributions that Native artists are making in this social media world. You can see tons and tons of different types of beadwork and different styles of art, Native art. And so I'm excited for this. I think it's a great opportunity to plug all Native artists and to encourage people to seek those out.
Talking about plugging Native artists, one thing that I really like about your Instagram or your Facebook account is that every Friday you highlight an artist that maybe Jordan has found. And it's not necessarily just here in the Valley, but it's clear across the United States. He is always on the lookout for Native artists who are inspiring people and who are inspired. And I think that that's a wonderful way to just start digging deeper into Native arts in general.
Yeah, and as our social media manager, you can expect to see Turtle Island Art Collective also on the BYU Arts Partnership page and Instagram grid. I also hope that we have members of the Turtle Island Art Collective presenting at our summer conference this next June for Arts Express for elementary school teachers. We will be focusing specifically on Native American arts and having Native American themed arts integrated lesson plans and ideas at the conference this summer. So if you enjoyed this podcast and this series, we hope you'll join us for this Native inspired conference as well. Native inspired? No. A conference full of inspiring natives. That's what I learned. And I'm so glad that I could show what I learned in the end of this episode. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brenda, for hosting with me. And I hope you have an artful day.
Artful Teaching is made possible by the BYU Arts Partnership and the McKay School of Education.
Thanks to James Houston for editing this podcast. Music was generously provided by Connor Chi, a Navajo Diné composer and performer.
And special thanks to all of the teachers who are changing lives every day while serving in schools.
If you like what you heard, please leave us a review. You can find all the show notes for this episode and more resources at advancingartsleadership.com.
And don't forget to check out our tribe-approved lesson plans on the website as well.
I'm Heather Francis.
And I'm Callie Phlox.
And I'm Brenda Beyal.
Wishing you an artful journey.